The 2025 NFL draft class is a couple of days away, so in today's video, I want to talk about what is the dream scenario for every single team of the 2025 NFL draft. Subscribe and like the video if you guys do go on to enjoy. Let's hop into it. So we are going to be doing this by a team-by-team basis, beginning with the Arizona Cardinals. I personally believe the best case scenario for the Arizona Cardinals is one of two players, those being a Will Johnson or a Walter Nolan. You could also go Kenneth Grant as well as potentially a receiver, but I think that Walter Nolan and Will Johnson are the two highest upside players in massive positions of need. Next up is the Atlanta Falcons, and I think dream scenario, they have two options: Mike Green out of Marshall or Jalen Walker out of Georgia. This team needs a disruptor on the defensive side of the football, somebody who can get pressure on a quarterback. If the Falcons get lucky and get one of those two guys on the board while they're taking a pick, they should definitely consider one of those two guys. If I had to pick between Green and Jalen Walker, even though I don't think Jalen Walker will be available, if I had to pick one, I think I would go Jalen Walker, but I also could see Mike Green being an awesome pick too. Next is the Baltimore Ravens, who take a pick very late in the draft, but I think a Donovan Ezeraku or a James Pierce Jr. would really be nice to add as a 3-4, probably more outside linebacker role to just go and put pressure on the quarterback. Learn from Kyle Van Noy, learn from Odafe Owe, and man, I think that defensive line would look really sharp next year. Next is the Buffalo Bills, and this one's pretty interesting because you can kind of go a number of different ways. I would say best case scenario, Kenneth Grant would be awesome to add to this defense. But if you want to look on offense, obviously if a Ted McMillan is there, you take him, but he probably won't be. I'll go with Matthew Golden for an offensive player. Either way, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think Matthew Golden would be a fun fit because he could kind of be what the Bills thought Amari Cooper was going to be. He just didn't kind of work out for them last year. In terms of Kenneth Grant, he's a big, plug-and-play player. He can stuff the run while also giving you a little bit of juice as a pass rusher. This defensive line room isn't bad, but it definitely could use that next-level guy. Next up is the Carolina Panthers, and obviously dream case scenario here is that Abdul Carter somehow falls to them or they trade up for Abdul Carter. That would be obviously the best case scenario for them. If you want to just stick and pick or even trade back for a player, Jalen Walker makes a ton of sense in this team. He kind of just fixes two huge issues, which is an off-ball linebacker and a disruptor who can create some havoc on the quarterback. Next is the Chicago Bears, and I think their dream scenario is Ashton Jeanty. They've done such a good job this offseason of just plugging in any issues, whether it's offensive line or an edge rusher. If Ashton Jeanty falls to this team, I think their offense would just be incredible. If you want to look outside of Ashton Jeanty, I would also say Mike Green would make a lot of sense to add to this defensive line because they might just want to have one more true awesome pass rusher, but you can probably get that in the second round, especially if Ashton Jeanty falls into your lap. Next is the Cincinnati Bengals, and they need a guy on the defensive line so unbelievably badly. So I think best case scenario for them, I'm looking at a couple names here. Shamar Stewart for a high upside pass rusher with an unlimited ceiling. Micah Williams if you want a bit more of a surefire second option to Trey Hendrickson, assuming you bring him back. Or the third sneaky option would be an offensive lineman such as a Kelvin Banks or maybe even an Armand Membu if he somehow falls for whatever reason. Those would all be kind of dream best case scenarios for the Cincinnati Bengals. For me, I think defensive line has to be their priority number one. So if a guy like Shamar Stewart or Micah Williams are there, I don't think you think too hard about it. I guess I'll also throw somebody else in there like a Mike Green as well if he somehow were to fall, but I don't think he makes it to Cincinnati. All in all, they have to add pieces to either the offensive line or the defensive line because both those positions are fairly weak. Next, the Cleveland Browns, and I'm actually going to give you two players for their first round pick and their second round pick just because their first round pick is already kind of set in stone. For their best case scenario, it would be, I guess, Cam Ward falling to them, but more than likely a Travis Hunter makes a ton of sense for this team. He plugs in at receiver or you can plug in at corner. Assuming Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter is the pick, either one works for me. In the second round, I think best case scenario, either a Jackson Dart or a Jalen Milroe were to fall to them. I'm not terribly high on either of those quarterbacks, but this team need a quarterback. I don't see them going into next year with Joe Flacco as their starter, nor Kenny Pickett. So if they can find a quarterback in the second round that makes some sense to rely upon later in the year or in the future, I think it would be a Milroe or a Jackson Darts. Next is the Dallas Cowboys, and there's barely two players. Ashton Jeanty, who's probably not going to make it to him, but more specifically, Tetairoa McMillan. You put Tet McMillan next to CeeDee Lamb with Jake Ferguson and Vontae Turpin with Dak Prescott. I think that offense becomes a lot more explosive. Yes, they still need to add a running back later in the draft, maybe a Damian Martinez or somebody in the second round like Caleb Johnson. But man, if you add a Tetairoa McMillan to this offense, it just completely changes things for this Cowboys team, because right now they are so unbelievably CeeDee Lamb dependent. And if CeeDee Lamb were to miss some time next year, this offense would go from being pretty good to likely one of the worst in the NFL, at least as it is currently constructed. Next is the Denver Broncos, and frankly, they don't have a ton of major needs. But if I had to say best case scenario, I would say either Amarian Hampton or Colston Loveland falls into their lap. Both those players I typically do mocks the Broncos, and I think it's usually the best pick available. But I also do think in the draft, I would not be surprised one bit if those guys go a lot earlier than expected. So for the Denver Broncos, if you want to secure those guys, you might have to trade up for them. But regardless of it, Amarian Hampton, I think, would be a perfect fit in a Sean Payton system. I also think Colston Loveland as a threat with Evan Ingram for a year would really make that weapon rooms for Bo Nix significantly better. If I had to pick between Loveland and Hampton, if hypothetically they were both available, I would probably lean towards Colston Loveland, because I think he's just right now a harder position to find with the tight ends, whereas running backs you could take one in round 2. But man, I'd be really thinking about Amarian Hampton as well. Next to the Detroit Lions, and they need a pass rusher opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. I think best case scenario, one of, and I'm going to repeat somebody who I talked about a bit earlier, one of Shamar Stewart, Mykel Williams, and I'll throw another one out here too, maybe a James Pierce Jr. falls into their lap. Any one of those guys I think could play opposite of what they already have in Aiden Hutchinson and be major impact players. Also throw one more name, Nick Scorton. I'm a big fan of his, so we'll also just kind of talk about him as well. Next up is the Green Bay Packers, and I think best case scenario, Tetairoa McMillan falls to them. I don't think that's going to happen, so if that doesn't happen, their best case scenario to me would be adding Jahdae Barron to their secondary. He could play in the slot, he could play on the outside, whatever you need him at, he can absolutely be a plug-and-play player. Assuming Jair Alexander does stay, I think that would make the secondary significantly better. Next is the Houston Texans, and while I think they've done a decent job in addressing some of their offensive line issues, I still do view it as being a massive need for this team. So for me, best case scenario here is that one of either Josh Simmons or Kelvin Banks falls to the Houston Texans. Do I think they have to start immediately? Maybe, but probably not. If they don't want to, they don't have to. It could be a long-term play to be the future left tackle or right tackle for this team, or maybe even a guard if you want to move Banks inside. Between Banks and Simmons, I'm higher on Banks, but I definitely can see the upside with Josh Simmons. Next is the Indianapolis Colts, and best case scenario, I have two names for you, Tyler Warren or Jahad Campbell. It does feel like Tyler Warren is not going to be available there, but if he does fall to them, I think it makes a lot of sense. Outside of that, Jahad Campbell just makes a ton of sense, and it does sound like the Colts are actually interested in him. Adding a dynamic linebacker who can create havoc on a quarterback just makes so much sense for this Colts team. It'd be a lot of fun to see him out there, especially because the linebacker position for the Colts used to be a strength. Now it's not necessarily a strength. So adding a Jahad Campbell could change that up. Next is the Jacksonville Jaguars. And best case scenario for the Jaguars is that one of either Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter falls to them. But because I don't think either one of those things are going to happen, I kind of think best case scenario for them is just taking Mason Graham. Obviously, I'm high on Mason Graham. I think most of us are. But I have heard some people not so high on him, so obviously that might be a bit of a controversial take. But I don't think running back is as big, nor receiver is as big of a need as a defensive interior lineman. So I could go with any of those three guys, but for me, Mason Graham is probably best case scenario for this team. Next is the Kansas City Chiefs, and I think best case scenario for the Chiefs is that one of the top tackles ends up falling in the draft class. So again, I'll repeat some names here. Josh Simmons, Josh Connerly, Gray Zabel, Kelvin Banks. One of those guys falls to this team. I think they can be a plug-and-play starter basically immediately, especially with Jalen Moore just being a massive question mark. Next up is the Las Vegas Raiders, and I think best case scenario for this team is that Ashton Jeanty is on the board. I know that might not seem like the flashiest pick in the world, but it's kind of a weird class where I don't see this team having another reason to not take Jeanty. Like outside of Jeanty, I'm either taking Mason Graham if he falls to me or Will Johnson. I just think Jeanty is the better player than both of them by a pretty sizable margin. Like, I think there's a huge drop-off after Ashton Jeanty. Jeanty, to me, is one of the few blue-chip prospects. So, for the Raiders, I think it just makes so much sense to add a guy like Jeanty to this offense. pair that up with Geno Smith and what they already have with Brock Bowers, and that offense can look a lot better next year. Next is the LA Chargers, a team that has been a little bit more quiet than I thought they were going to be this offseason, but they did bring in a Mekhi Becton and, of course, a Najee Harris, which were good additions to this team. I think best case scenario that Colston Loveland ends up falling there just makes so much sense for them to take Colston Loveland, a dynamic receiving threat in the tight end room. They have not, frankly, I don't know if they've really ever had that with Justin Herbert. Herbert would have somebody that he can just throw the ball to and just make a ton of plays. He's more of a receiver than he is a tight end, which is kind of what this Chargers team needs, not to mention the Michigan connection also does help. Next up is the LA Rams, and I have a variety of different options I can go here. I think best case scenario, one of Jahdae Barron or Will Johnson falls to them. There's also the possibility of a Colston Loveland falling to them, and I also do want to mention the tackles. If I had to give you one specific name, I'll go Jahdae Barron. I think he could be a plug-and-play starter wherever they need him at. He can be their go-to outside corner, or he can play safety, or he could play in the nickel. Wherever they need him at, I think he'll be super successful wherever he is at. Next is the Miami Dolphins, who have a lot of work to still be done. This team feels like it's heading in the wrong direction. But if I had to say best case scenario for this Dolphins team, maybe Will Johnson, and maybe it's like a fully healthy Will Johnson that turns back the clock to 2023. I mean, there's not just one pure answer I could give you for the Dolphins. I could go tackle, I could go guard. I guess maybe Armand Membu would be like dream scenario because he fits their team so perfectly, but I don't think it's going to happen. So I'll just say Will Johnson with Armand Membu also being mentioned here. Next up is the Minnesota Vikings, and I think they need a really stud run stuffer up the middle. So I'm going to give you guys two names, those being Kenneth Grant and, again, Walter Nolan. I have some veterans in there right now who are going to get the job done next season, but a long-term play would definitely be nice, as well as just a true, like, big-time threat as a run stuffer. I think one of two of those guys that would make so much sense for the Minnesota Vikings to do so, because they just really need some depth and some youth in that positional group. Next is the New England Patriots, and I think obviously best case scenario, one of Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter falls to them at 4. But because I think that's just not going to happen, I would be so stunned if it's not 1, 2, 3, Cam Ward, Travis, and Abdul Carter in any order. I think the Patriots are going to be in a situation where they're probably just going to have to go with Will Campbell. So best case scenario, one of Travis or Abdul. More than likely, the best case scenario is probably just going to be Will Campbell or Armand Membu. Next is the New Orleans Saints, and I think best case scenario is going to be probably just taking a defensive lineman like a Mike Green or Jalen Walker or Micah Williams. But I think long term, getting a quarterback within the first 3 rounds who you feel confident can be your future starter for at least a year or two would make this team significantly better in the long run, just because I think they need a direction and an answer for that quarterback room. Right now it's Derek Carr and Spencer Rattler, which is just not very good. And I think it's kind of holding up this roster from taking that next step. So finding their future quarterback could also be an awesome pick for them at any point in the draft. But in terms of their first round guy, probably a significantly good pass rusher. Next is the New York Giants, and they have 2 best case scenarios for them at pick number 3, and that's going to be Travis Hunter falls to them or Cam Ward falls to them. If those 2 guys are off the board, I guess best case scenario is Abdul Carter, but obviously, if you pick up a Cam Ward, he instantly becomes your starting quarterback, and your team is looking like a very bright future team. If you get Travis Hunter, then hey, you have a third receiver next to Neighbors and Darius Slayton, as well as he can also be a Deonte Banks replacement. If it's Abdul Carter, though, he's your Kayvon Thibodeau replacement, and you just have 2 premier pass rushers as well as Dexter Lawrence up the middle and have one of the scariest defensive lines in the league. Next up is the New York Jets, and I think best case scenario for this team is that Armand Membu falls to them. I don't think it's very unlikely that it doesn't happen. In fact, I think it's actually pretty likely. This is a Jets team that feels like they're building up a strong offensive line, but it's missing that right tackle. So if you take an Armand Membu, he starts immediately at right tackle, and your offensive line is built to win now as well as for the future. So you're basically starting Justin Fields with as much help as possible on that offensive line. They still need to add a receiver and interior defensive line depth, but I think Armand Membu just makes so much sense. If you want to throw another one out there, Mason Graham is also a sneaky good pickup for this team if he does fall to them. Next is the Philadelphia Eagles, who are kind of a tricky spot here because they're the last pick and you just don't know who's going to be available. So best case scenario for this team is that somebody really good falls to them, like they typically do for the Philadelphia Eagles. So some guys who might fall to the Philadelphia Eagles that would make some sense for them. Any of the top corners, either Will Johnson or Jahdae Barron. I'll even throw Maxwell Hairston could also be interesting. Nick Emanwori is a kind of a fan favorite for Eagles fans. I'm not too high on Nick. I think he's more of a day 2 guy, but if you're that high on him, throw him in there as well. But I think if you're saying what is best case scenario, I'll throw like a Calvin Banks out there to be your Lane Johnson future replacement, or even stick in and play guard, be the replacement for Mekhi Becton. Yeah, I'll just throw that out at you. It's kind of a weird spot because it's 32 in the draft, so you just don't know who's going to be available. So just my final word, best player that falls into the Eagles' laps is probably the best case scenario for this team. Next up is the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I think best case scenario for the Pittsburgh Steelers is just taking the quarterback. I think they have to at this point, because I don't know if Aaron Rodgers is actually going to sign with this team. If for whatever reason Rodgers is going to sign with this team, then I think best case scenario is taking one of Walter Nolan, Kenneth Grant, or I'll even throw Derek Harmon. But if we don't know what's happening with Aaron Rodgers, they have to get a quarterback because you're not rocking with Mason Rudolph. And I think the second best quarterback after Cam Ward is Shedeur Sanders. So if Shedeur does fall to 21, it just makes a lot of sense. Next up is San Francisco, and they have a variety of needs. I would say best case scenario for the San Francisco 49ers is that they can find a premier pass rusher, whether it's a defensive tackle or an edge rusher. I'll say Jalen Walker, Mike Green, or Mason Graham falls to them at, I believe, pick 11. If you want to go outside of that, Will Campbell would also be a fantastic pick, and it would be somebody who would have to fall to them, but it would be an awesome pick. Next is the Seattle Seahawks, and I think best case scenario for them is they get a really solid, flexible, and versatile guard / tackle. So for me, it would be one of either Kelvin Banks or Gray Zabel. It's been the pick I've done very consistently, and I just think it's best case scenario for the Seattle Seahawks. They have to address this offensive line. It's injury prone, especially Abraham Lucas, and it's just not very good, even when healthy. So for this team to take the next step, because they kind of want to now that Sam Darnold's there, you got to protect your quarterback, you got to protect those receivers and get them some help. So I think getting a versatile tackle guard prospect makes a ton of sense. Next is Tampa Bay, and I would say best case scenario for them is Jahad Campbell. Their linebacking core is a little bit older with Levante David, and frankly, it's just not very good. So if they can add a premier guy like a Jahad Campbell who can also create pressure on a quarterback, which this Buccaneers team also does need, I think it would make a ton of sense. Tennessee, it's Cam Ward. I don't think I need to say much more about it. I guess we could talk about their second round pick because that's a bit more interesting. I would say best case scenario for this Titans team is that one of Luther Burden, Emeka Egbuka, or Matthew Golden falls to them in day 2. Because if that does happen, you're pairing one of those premier receivers up there with freaking Calvin Ridley, and you could put together a nice little receiving core down there. Of the 3, I think probably Luther Burden, I think might be the best fit, just because he could play on the slot and also play on the outside, with Calvin Ridley also kind of doing a bit of everything. And lastly, the Washington Commanders, and I think best case scenario for the Washington Commanders is that one of a top defensive tackle / edge / corner falls to this team. So we're going to talk through names again. Jahdae, Will Johnson. I also think Malachi Starks could also be a fun pickup for this team. Just kind of throwing that out there. Edge rusher wise, you're probably hoping that a James Pierce Jr., Shamar Stewart, Micah Williams, Donovan Ezeraku, one of those guys falls to you. And in terms of an interior defensive lineman, which is not a huge need, but definitely one they might want to consider, a Kenneth Grant, Walter Nolan, Derek Harmon, one of those guys I think also does make a ton of sense for the Commanders to take. If I had to give you one specific name, I guess I will throw out Donovan Ezeraku. Yeah, I guess we'll just go Donovan because they need a premier pass rusher pretty badly. So, but you guys let me know in the comment section below, do you agree or disagree with any of the names that I threw out here in this video? And if you guys want more detail about a specific player or a specific team, just let me know in the comment section below and I'll make sure to respond to you guys. And if you enjoyed, hit the like and subscribe button. Love you guys. Peace.